basically, I think the most important thing is to keep your temper and to realize that the anyone who wants to have a good, productive conversation online is going to be in the minority, unless you're in a very special forum with good moderation. A lot of places you're going to go are just going to have the most polarized voices speaking. The important thing for you to do at all times is remember to keep your cool. Don't lose your temper. It's not going to help your point, and it's not going to help the people you're trying to argue for. So that's just a top line thing that I think you should always remember. It can be hard to hear something that is offensive to you. It can be hard to hear something that misstates facts that you know to be true. The way to persuade people is not to shame them for having points of view or being misinformed. The way to persuade them is to get them to understand where you're coming from. And it will, in the end, also help you feel better, I think, because then you will feel heard as well. So here's some tips. First off, think about your purpose. Don't go into it thinking, don't go into it impulsively. You see something that irritates you, you start arguing. Chances are that's not going to be the right way to do it. The thing I would really recommend is think about what you want to do. Are you trying to convince someone who wrote something that you didn't like? Do you want your own point of view to be validated? You should probably be realistic about the idea that no one is likely to change their mind when they've already begun to do things that are offensive. You've probably all heard the term, don't feed the trolls. There are people out there who are just going to say things and do things to upset people of good faith and try to get people to argue on their terms. If you do that, then they've won already. It doesn't matter what you say, how much you know, and how morally correct your point of view is. You should remember that there are people like that. You can usually recognize their points of view right away. And in the end, I think what you ought to consider doing is that those people are not going to change their minds. However, the people who might change their minds are the people who are reading it. So think about talking to them. You're trying to it's like a presidential debate. You don't see Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton debate and then one of them say to the other, you know what, you've convinced me, I'm going to vote for you and instead of myself. These are public debates. You're having them for the benefit of an audience, and the audience is your target. So think about that and think about how you would react as an audience member. Don't get mad. I said this before, but it can't be said too many times. If you feel that the person is saying things that are intended to attack you, if you feel a person is potentially doing something that could endanger your safety, or if it just feels like you've come into a forum where people are not going to be listening to what you have to say, just bail. It's fine. The internet is made up of conversations. You'll find another one. You'll find a place to lay out your point of view. There's a lot of people, as Denzel said, looking for information or receptive to information about things that you might think everyone's made up their mind about. But when you're engaging, don't be a jerk. Don't gloat when you know more. Remember how it feels when someone tells you something that contradicts what you already think you know. Even if they're doing it in a good way, it hurts. It's hard to hear something that messes with your worldview. So you want to be gentle, even to the people who aren't being gentle to you. And remember that your goal is to persuade them, not to feel like you won. Winning is not important if you haven't won, basically, if you haven't changed anyone's mind. Again, just a method to keep cool. Just think about what you would do in a conversation if you heard someone say something like that. I don't think you'd yell at them. I don't think you'd call them a jerk. I don't think you'd immediately assert that they're a Russian bot. I think you probably listen to them and try to understand where they're coming from and why. You have the opportunity to do that. Again, if you wouldn't say something to someone's face, chances are there's a reason. It would be a negative social interaction. So use that as a way to think it through. Oops. When I spoke to this professor at MIT, who's a very smart guy, he and a couple other people I talked to talked about road rage as a good example. I mean, when you're not looking at a person in the eye, you lose a lot of the idea that they're a person, and things are completely decontextualized on the internet, is what he's saying in this quote. So trying to remember the person behind the message, and try to think of them as an earnest person that you might be able to actually have something in common with. They have kids like you have kids. They have pets like you have pets. They drove to work today. How did a human being a lot like you come to a point of view that's so different than yours? It's humanizing, and it will help you keep your focus on the argument, because you're not attacking a person. That's never gonna work. So that's helpful. This is a big takeaway from my story, and I think you'll find it if you read it. The internet was created as a vehicle for exchanging information and sharing ideas, and it can still be a great tool for that purpose if you can keep your temper. It's all on you. It can be a nasty place, but you can make a difference there if you are a person who is patient, calm, and purposeful in what you're saying, when, and why. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yes. So if anyone has any questions for Andy, one of the things that I found very interesting in what you said, Andy, was in terms of not feeding the trolls. If you do feed the trolls, you wade into their waters, you get into their weeds, and you become part of their conversation as opposed to starting your own. And in so doing, you've already lost. Is that correct?
That's the way I see it. I mean, they don't care if they win or lose. Their goal is to make you mad. Once you realize that you're arguing with a person of bad faith, what's the point? The only thing you can think of is there are people reading this who may be receptive to my point of view. And if you determine that to be the case, then you can look right past your interlocutor and try to just talk to the audience.
And given, you beg of us to sort of have some proper temperament. If we're not going to say this to someone face to face, we shouldn't say it online. I would argue that a lot of people who are online don't abide by that kind of rule. In the face of that kind of, that kind of disposition from other people, I mean, how do you expect us to, maybe not to respond, but how do you expect us to start conversations and maintain conversations in light that, other people are not as, are more unruly?
It's hard to put the onus on someone who is trying to do a good thing to be the better person. But in the end, I think you have to, right? All of the things that I talked about are things that people are doing either because they're not good at arguing, they never learned how to do it, because they never wanted to have an earnest argument, or because they, I think actually those are the two reasons. I mean, either someone's misinformed or angry, and you have the choice of how to interact with that person. You can't control their behavior. And if your goal is to persuade somebody, then you have to deal with what's in your control.